おはようございます。こんにちは。今日はドラキュラを読みます。It's supposed to be in English, I forgot. Good morning. Good afternoon. Today we will read Dracula. Because lately I'm in a vampire-y mood. We will start in a little bit. I'm not drinking anything right now. But I should. I had coffee at like 5:30. I should have coffee again. I'm gonna make coffee. A to 1分. One more minute. I'm expecting a package, and it's not here yet. It's supposed to come between 8 a.m. and 12 p.m. And it's 11 a.m. right now. Unless they put it in my mailbox. But it doesn't say it's delivered. It's out for delivery still. では、始めましょう。新しいイラストを描きました。Before we start, I made a new illustration. This is a new character. Here. His name is Kuromori Rei. Kuromori is his surname. Rei is his given name that he gave himself. Anyway, let's start. I have to cough. Okay. So first of all, ちょっと待って。When you copy it, reuse it. When you copy it, give it away, reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license. And the copyright is 1897, so it's long after. Now it's public domain, which is why I'm reading it. Alright. I'm gonna hide the cursor. That's fine. Okay. So you can't see my cursor now. That's how I want it to be. And I'll move Charlie a little bit out of the way so his health bar, or his experience bar, he'll go right over here. Go over here. So, how these papers have been placed in sequence will be made manifest in the reading of them. All needless matters have been eliminated so that a history almost at variance with the possibilities of later date belief may stand forth as simple fact. There is throughout no statement of past things wherein memory may err, for all records chosen are exactly contemporary, from the given standpoints and within the range of knowledge of those who made them. Dracula, Chapter 1, Jonathan Harker's Journal. 3rd of May. Districts. Left Munich at 8:35 p.m. on 1st of May. Arriving at Vienna early next morning, should have arrived at 6:46, but train was an hour late. Budapest seems a wonderful place from the glimpse which I got from it. From the train and the little I could walk through the streets. I feared to go very far from the station, as we had arrived late and would start as near the correct time as possible. The impression I had was that we were leaving the west and entering the east, the most western of splendid bridges over Danube, which is here of noble width and depth, took us among the traditions of the Turkish rule. We left in a pretty good time, and came after nightfall to Klausenberg. Here I stopped for the night at the Hotel Royal. I had for dinner, or rather supper, a chicken done up in some way with red pepper, which was very good, but thirsty. Memo. Get recipe from Mina. I asked the waiter, and he said it was called paprika hendel. And said that was a national dish. I should be able to get it anywhere along the Parthians. I found my smattering of German very useful here. Indeed, I don't know how I should be able to get on without it. Having had some time at my disposal when in London, I had visited the British Museum and made search among the books and maps in the library regarding Transylvania. It had struck me that some foreknowledge of the country could hardly fail to have some importance in dealing with the noblemen of the country. I find that the district he named is in the extreme east of the country, just on the borders of the 3 states: Transylvania, Moldavia, Bukovina. In the midst of the Carpathian Mountains, one of the wildest and least known portions of Europe, I was not able to light on any map or work giving the exact locality of the castle Dracula, as there are no maps of this country as yet to compare with our own ordnance survey maps. But I found that the post town named by Count Dracula is a fairly well-known place. I shall enter here some of my notes as they may refresh my memory when I talk over my travels with Mina. In the population of Transylvania, there are 4 distinct nationalities: Saxons in the south, and mixed with them the Wallachs, who are descendants of the Dacians. Magyars in the west, and Szekels in the east and north. I am going among the latter, who claim to be descended from Attila and the Huns. This may be so, for when the Magyars conquered the country in the 11th century, they found the Huns and settled in it. I read that every known superstition in the world is gathered into the horseshoe of the Carpathians, as if it were the center of some imaginative whirlpool. If so, my stay may be interesting. Memo: I must ask the Count all about them. I did not sleep well, though my bed was comfortable enough, for I had all sorts of queer dreams. There was a dog howling all night under my window, which may have had something to do with it, or it may have been the paprika, for I had to drink up all the water in my carafe, and was still thirsty. Towards morning, I slept and was wakened by the continuous knocking at my door, so I guess I must have been sleeping soundly then. I had for breakfast more paprika, and a sort of porridge of maize flour, which they said was mamaliga, and eggplant stuffed with forcemeat. A very excellent dish, which they call impletata. Impletata. Oh, ちょっと待って。I clicked on the wrong window. I'd want to try these. I had to hurry breakfast, for the train started little before 8. Or rather, it ought to have done so after rushing to the station at 7:30, I had to sit in the carriage for more than an hour before we began to move. It seems to me that the further east you go, the more unpunctual are the trains. What ought they to be in China? All day long, we seemed to dawdle through a country which was full of beauty of every kind. Sometimes we saw little towns or castles on the top of steep hills, such as we see in old missals. Sometimes we ran by rivers and streams, which seemed from the wide, stormy margin of each side of them to be subjected to great floods. It takes a lot of water and running strong to sweep the outside edge of a river clear. At every station, there were groups of people, sometimes crowds, in all sorts of attire. Some of them were just like the peasants at home, or those I saw coming through France and Germany, with short jackets and round hats and homemade trousers. But others were very picturesque. The women looked pretty, except when you got near them, they were very clumsy about the waist. They had all full white sleeves of some kind or another. And most of them had big belts with lots of strips around of something fluttering from them, like the dresses in a ballet. But of course, they were petticoats under them. The strangest figures we saw were the Slovaks, who were more barbarian than the rest, with their big cowboy hats, great baggy dirty white trousers, white linen shirts, and enormous heavy leather belts, nearly a foot wide, all studded over with brass nails. They wore high boots with their trousers tucked into them, and they had long black hair, heavy black mustaches, and were very picturesque, but do not look prepossessing. On the stage, they would be set down at once as some old Oriental band of brigands. They are, however, I am told, very harmless and rather wanting in natural self-assertion. It was on the dark side of twilight when we went to Bistritz, which is a very interesting old place, being practically on the frontier, for the Borgo Pass leads from it into Bukovina. It has had a very stormy existence, and it certainly shows marks of it. 50 years ago, a series of great fires took place, which made terrible havoc on 5 separate occasions at the very beginning of the 17th century. It underwent a siege of 3 weeks and lost 13,000 people, the casualties of war proper, being assisted by famine and disease. Count Dracula had directed me to go to the Golden Krone Hotel, which I found to my great delight to be thoroughly old-fashioned, and of course I wanted to see all I could of the ways of the country. I was evidently expected, for when I got near the door, I faced a very cheery-looking elderly woman in the usual pleasant. I faced a cheery-looking elderly woman in the usual peasant dress. White undergarments with long double apron, front and back of colored stuff, fitting almost too tight for modesty. When I came close, she bowed and said, "They are Englishmen?" "Yes," I said. "Jonathan Harker." She smiled and gave some message to an elderly man in white shirt and sleeves who had followed her to the door. He went, but immediately returned with a letter. "My friend, welcome to the Carpathian. I am anxiously expecting you. Sleep well tonight. At 3 tomorrow, the diligence will start for Bukovina. A place on it is kept for you, at the Borgo Pass. My carriage will await you, and will bring you to me. I trust that your journey from London has been a happy one, and there you will enjoy your stay in my beautiful land. Your friend, Dracula." "4th of May. I found that my landlord had got a letter from the Count directing him to secure the best place on the coach for me. But on making inquiries as to details, he seemed somewhat reticent, and pretended that he could not understand my German. This could not be true, because up to then he had understood it perfectly. At least he answered my questions exactly as if he did. He and his wife and the old lady who had received me looked at each other in a frightened sort of way. He mumbled out that the money had been sent in a letter, and that was all he knew. When I asked him if he knew Count Dracula and could tell me anything of his castle, both he and his wife crossed themselves, saying that they knew nothing at all, and simply refused to speak further. It was so near the time of the starting that I had no time to ask anyone else, for it was all very mysterious, and not by any means comforting. Just before I was leaving, the old lady came up to my room and said in a very hysterical way, "Must you go? Oh, young man. Oh, young heir. Must you go? She was in such an excited state that she seemed to have lost her grip of what German she knew, and mixed it all up with some other languages I did not know at all. I was just able to follow her up by asking as many questions. When I told her that I must go at once, and that I was engaged on the important business, she asked again, "Do you remember what day it is?" I answered that it was the 4th of May. She shook her head and said again. She shook her head and said again. ちょっと言いづらい。Oh yes, I know that. But do you know what day it is? On my saying, I did not understand. She went on. It is the eve of St. George's Day. Do you not know that tonight, when the clock strikes midnight, all the evil things in the world will have full sway? Do you know where you are going and what you are going to? She was in such evident distress that I tried to comfort her, but without effect. Finally, she went down on her knees and implored me not to go at all. At least wait a day or two before starting. It was all very ridiculous, but I did not feel comfortable. However, there was business to be done, and I could allow nothing to interfere with it. I therefore tried to raise her up, and said as gravely as I could that I thanked her. My duty was imperative, and that I must go. She then rose and dried her eyes, and taking a crucifix from her neck and offered it to me. I did not know what to do, for as an English churchman, I have been taught to regard such things as, in some measure, idolatrous. And yet, it seemed so ungracious to refuse an old lady, meaning so well in such a state of mind. She said, I suppose that the doubt on my face... She saw, I suppose, the doubt on my face, for she put the rosary around my neck and said, for your mother's sake, and went out of the room. I am writing this part of the diary whilst I am waiting for the coach, which is, of course, late. And the crucifix is still around my neck. Whether it is the old lady's fear or not, the many ghostly traditions of this place, or the crucifix itself, I did not know, but I am not feeling as easy as in my mind, as usual. If this book should ever reach Mina before I do, let it bring goodbye. Here comes the coach. "5th of May. The castle. The grey of the morning had passed, and the sun is high over the distant horizon, which seems jagged, whether with trees or the hills. I know not, for this is so far off that big things and little are mixed, and I am sleepy. I am not sleepy. And as I am not to be called till I awake, naturally I write till sleep comes. There are many odd things to put down, unless who reads them may fancy that I dined too well before I left Bistra's. Let me put down my dinner exactly. I dined on what they call robber steak. Bits of bacon, onion, and beef seasoned with red pepper and strung on sticks, and roasted over the fire in the simple style of the London's cat's meats. The wine was golden Mediasac, which produces a queer sting on the tongue, which is, however, not disagreeable. I had only a couple of glasses, this and nothing else. Oishii. When I got on the coach, the driver had not taken his seat, and I saw him talking with the landlady. They were evidently talking of me, for every now and again they looked at me and some of the people who were sitting on the bench outside the door, which they called by a name meaning word bearer, came and listened, and then looked at me, most of them pityingly. I could hear a lot of words repeated, queer words, for there were many nationalities in the crowd, so I quietly got my polyglot dictionary from the bag and looked them out. I must say, they were not cheering to me, for amongst them were Ordog, Satan, Poko, Hell, Stragokia, Witch, Vrolok, and Lokslak, both of which mean the same thing. One being Slovak and the other Serbian for something that is either werewolf or vampire. I must ask the Count about these superstitions. ちょっと待って。はい、失礼しました。When we started, the crowd round the inn door, which had by this time swelled to a considerable size, all made the sign of the cross and pointed 2 fingers towards me. With some difficulty, I got a fellow passenger to tell me what they mean. He would not answer at first, but on learning that I was English, he explained that it was a charm, or guard against the evil eye. This was not very pleasant for me. Just starting for an unknown place to meet an unknown man, but everyone seemed so kind-hearted and so sorrowful and so sympathetic that I could not but be touched. I shall never forget the last glimpse of which I had of the inn yard and its crowd of picturesque figures. All crossing themselves, they stood round the wide archway, with its background of rich foliage and oleander and orange trees in green tubs clustered in the center of the yard. And our driver, whose wide linen drawers covered the whole front of the box seat, Gotza, they call him, cracked his big whip over his 4 small horses, which ran abreast, and we set off our journey. I soon lost sight and recollection of ghostly fears and the beauty of the scene as we drove along. Although had I known the language, or rather languages, which my fellow passengers were speaking, I might not have been able to throw them off so easily. Before us lay a green sloping land full of forests and woods, with here and there steep hills, crowned with clumps of trees and farmhouses in the blank gable end to the road. There was everywhere a bewildering mass of fruit blossoms, apple, plum, pear, cherry, and as we drove by it, I could see the green grass under the trees, sprinkled with the fallen petals, in and out amongst the green hills of what they call here Mittelland, ran the road, losing itself as it swept around the grassy curve, or was shut out by the straggling ends of pine woods, which here and there ran down the hillside like tongues of flames. The road was rugged, but we seemed to fly over it with feverish haste. I could not understand what the haste meant, but the driver was evidently bent on losing no time in reaching Borgo Prund. I was told that this road is in summertime excellent, but had not yet been put in order after the winter snows. In this respect, it is different from the general run roads of the I was told that this road is in the summertime excellent, but that it had not been put in order after the winter snows. In this respect, it is different from the general run of roads in the Carpathians, where it is an old tradition that they are not to be kept in too good order of the old hospiters would not repair them, lest the Turks should think that they were preparing to bring in foreign troops, which is the hasten of the war, which was always really at loading point. Beyond the green swelling up hills of the Middleland rose mighty slopes of forest, up to the lofty steeps of the Carpathians themselves. Right and left of us, they towered, with the afternoon sun falling upon them and bringing out all the glorious colors of the beautiful range. Deep blue and purple in the shadows of the peaks, green and brown where grass and rock mingled, and an endless perspective of jagged rocks and pointed crags, till these were themselves lost in the distance, where the snowy peaks rose grandly. Here and there seemed mighty rifts of the mountains, through which, as the sun began to sink, we saw now and again white gleams of falling water. One of my companions touched my arm as we swept around the base of a hill and opened up lofty, snow-covered peak of a mountain, which seemed, as we wound on our serpentine way, to be right before us. Look, it's in Shek. God's seat, as he crossed himself reverently. As we wound on our endless way, and the sun sank lower and lower behind us, the shadows of the evening began to creep around us. This was emphasized by the fact that it was a snowy mountain top. Still held the sunset emphasize, and seemed to glow with a delicate cool pink. Here and there we passed Czechs and Slovaks, all in picturesque attire, but I noticed that the word was painfully prevalent by the roadside. There were many crosses, and as we swept by, my companion all crossed themselves. Here and there was a peasant man or woman kneeling before a shrine, who did not even turn round as we approached, but seemed in the self-surrender of devotion to averting their eyes nor ears for the outer world. Here there are many things new to me. For instance, hayricks in the trees, here and there. Very beautiful masses of weeping birch, their white stems shining like silver through the delicate green of the leaves. Now and again we passed a later wagon, the ordinary peasant's cart, with its long snake-like vertebrae, calculated to suit the inequalities of the road. On this were sure to be seated quite a group of homecoming peasants. Czechs in their white, and the Slovaks with their colored sheepskins. Here. The latter carrying lance fashion with their long staves and with the axe at the ends. As the evening fell and began to get very cold, and the growing twilight seemed to merge into one dark mistiness, the gloom of the trees, oak, beech, and pine, though in the valleys which ran deep between the spurs of the hills, as we ascended through the pass, the dark firs stood out here and there against the background of late-lying snow. Sometimes, as the road was cut through the pine woods that seemed in the darkness to be closing down upon us, the great masses of grayness which here and there bestrewed the trees produced a peculiarly weird and solemn effect, which carried on the thoughts of grim fancies and engendered earlier in the evening, when the falling sunset threw into the strange relief the ghost-like clouds which amongst the Carpathians seemed to wind ceaselessly through the valleys. Sometimes the hills were so steep that, despite our driver's haste, the horses could only go slowly. I wished to get down and walk up to them, as we do at home, but the driver would not hear of it. "No, no," he said. "You must not walk here. The dogs are too fierce." And then he added, with what he evidently meant for grim pleasantry, he looked around to catch the approving smile of the rest. "And you may have enough such matters before you go to sleep. The only stop you he would make was a moment's pause to light his lamps. When it grew dark, there seemed to be some excitement amongst the passengers, and they kept speaking to him, one after the other, as though urging him to further speed. He lashed the horses unmercifully, with his long whip, and with his wild cries of encouragement, urged them on to further exertions. Then, through the darkness, I could see a sort of patch of grey light ahead of us, as though there was a cleft in the hills. The excitement of the passengers grew greater. The crazy coach rocked on its great leather springs and swayed like a boat tossed on a stormy sea. I had to hold on. The road grew more level as we appeared to fly along. Then the mountains seemed to come nearer to us, each side to frown down upon us. We were entering on the Borgo Pass. One by one, several of the passengers offered me gifts, which they pressed upon me with an earnestness which would take no denial. These were certainly of an odd and varied kind, but each was given in simple good faith, and with a kindly word and blessing, and a strange mixture of fair-meaning movements, which I had seen outside the hotel at Bistris. The sign of the cross and the guard against the evil eye. Then we flew along. The driver leaned forward, and on each side of the passengers, craning over the edge of the coach, peered eagerly into the darkness. It was evident that something was very exciting was either happening or expected. But though I asked each passenger, no one would give me the slightest explanation. The state of excitement kept on for some little time, and we saw before us the pass opening up on the eastern side. There were dark, rolling clouds overhead, and in the air, the heavy, oppressive sense of thunder. It seemed as though the mountain range had separated two atmospheres, and that now we had got into the thunderous one. I was now myself looking out for the conveyance which was to take me to the Count. Each moment I expected to see the glare of lamps through the blackness, but all was dark. The only light was the flickering rays of our own lamps, in which the stream from our hard-driven horses rose in a white cloud. We could not see now the sandy road lying before us, but there was on it no sign of a vehicle. The passengers drew back with a sigh of gladness, which seemed to mock my own disappointment, which was already thinking that I had the best do. When the driver, looking at his watch, said to the others something which could hardly hear. It was spoken so quietly and in so low a tone I thought it was an hour less than the time. And turning to me, he said in German, worse than my own, There is no carriage here. The air is not expected at all. He will now come on to Bukovina, or return tomorrow, or the next day. Better the next day. We'll see. The horses began to neigh and snort and plunge wildly, so that the driver had to hold them up. And then, amongst a chorus of screams from the peasants, the universal crossing of themselves, a caleche of 4 horses drove up behind us, overtook us, and drew up beside the coach. I could see from the flash of our lamps, as the rays fell on them, that the horses were coal-blacked and splendid animals. They were driven by a tall man with a long brown beard and a great black hat, which seemed to hide his face from us. I could only see the gleam of very bright eyes, which seemed red in the lamplight. As he turned at us, he said to the driver, "You are early tonight, my friend." The man stammered in reply. The English air was in a hurry, to which the stranger replied, "That is why I suppose you wished him to go on to Bukovina. You cannot deceive me, my friend. I know too much, my horses are swift. As he spoke, he smiled, and lamplight fell on the hard-looking mouth. With very red lips and sharp-looking teeth, as white as ivory, one of my companions whispered another line from the burgers, Lenore. Den die Toten reiten schnell, for the dead travel fast. Before I go on, I want some coffee. Hi, お待たせしました。The strange driver evidently heard the words, for he looked up with a gleaming smile. The passenger turned his face away, and at the same time putting out his two fingers and crossing themselves. "Give me the heir's luggage," said the driver, with the exceedingly alacrity. My bags were handed out and put in a caleche. Then I descended from the side of the coach, as the caleche was close enough alongside, the driver helping me with a hand which caught my arm in a grip of steel. His arms must have been prodigious. Without a word, he shook his reins, and the horses turned, and we swept into the darkness of the pass. I looked back and saw the steam from the horses of the coach, by the light of the lamps, projected against it. The figures of my light companions crossing themselves. Then the driver cracked his whip, and called to his horses, and off they swept on their way to Gavonia. As they sank into the darkness, I felt a strange chill and a lonely feeling come over me. But a cloak was thrown over my shoulders, and a rug across my knees, and the driver said in excellent German, "The night is chill, mynheer, and the master and the count bade me take all care of you." There is a flask of Slivovitz, the plum brandy of the country, underneath the seat if you should require it. I did not take any, but it was a comfort to know it was there all the same. I felt a little strangely about, and not a little frightened. I think had there been any alternative, I should have taken it, instead of prosecuting the unknown night journey. The carriage went on at a hard pace straight along, and we made a complete turn and went along another straight road. It seemed to me that they were simply going over and over the same ground again, so I took note of the same salient point and found that this was so. I would have liked to ask the driver what this all meant, but I really feared to do so, for I thought that place as I was, any protest would have no effect in case there had been an intention to delay. By and by, however, I was curious to know how time was passing. I struck a match, and by flame looked at my watch. It was within a few minutes of midnight. This gave me sort of a shock, for I suppose the general superstition about midnight was increased by my recent experiences. I waited with a sick feeling of suspense. Then a dog began to howl somewhere in the farmhouse down the road, a long, agonizing wailing as if it from fear. The sound was taken up by another dog, and then another and another, till borne on the wind, which had now sighed softly through the pass, a wild howling began, which seemed to come from all over the country, as far as the imagination could grasp it through the gloom of the night. At the first howl, the horses began to strain and rear, but the driver spoke to them soothingly, and they quieted down, but shivered and sweated through a runaway from sight and fright. Then far off in the distance, from the mountains, on which side of us began, a louder and sharper howling, that of wolves, which affected both the horses and myself in the same way, for I was minded to jump from the caleche and run, whilst they feared again, and plunged madly, so that the driver had to use all his great strength to keep them from bolting in a few minutes. Hola. In a few minutes, however, my own rear ears got accustomed to the sound, and the horses so far became quiet, and the driver was able to descend and to stand before them. He petted and soothed them, and whispered something in their ears, as I have heard of horse tamers doing, with extraordinary effect, for under his caress they became quite manageable again. Quite manageable. Though they still trembled, the driver again took his seat, and shaking his reins, started off at a great pace. This time, after going to the far side of the pass, he suddenly turned down a narrow roadway, which ran sharply to the right. Kyo wa Dracula yondemasu. Today we are reading Dracula. I meant this part. Ya, ¿cómo estás? May as well take a little break. Estoy leyendo Dracula. How is the reading going? I got to this part, if you want to keep up. Feed arigato. Thank you for the feed. We haven't actually met Dracula yet. I don't... Well, you met somebody with red lips and sharp teeth. A little honey to soothe the throat. For yourself or for me? Because I've been coughing. So right before this, there were dogs barking and then wolves howling. Oh, このキャラクター紹介しました. I also introduced this character. The speech bubbles are randomized, but he says his name at some point. There it is. Just what I needed. Kuromori Rei. I thought he would be fitting for today. So we're starting here. I'm gonna get it to a good spot on the screen. Oh, no. Oh, we're almost to chapter 2. Okay, I think this is good enough. Soon, we were hemmed in with the trees, which in places arched right up over the roadway till we passed as through a tunnel, and again great frowning rocks guarded us boldly on either side. Though we were in shelter, we could hear the rising wind of it, for it moaned and whistled through the rocks. The branches of the trees crashed together as we swept along. It grew colder and colder still. Fine, powdery snow began to fall, so that soon we and all around us were covered with a white blanket. The keen wind still carried the howling of the dogs, though this grew fainter as we went on our way. The baying of the wolves sounded nearer and nearer, as though they were closing round on us from every side. I grew dreadfully afraid. The horses shared my fear. The driver, however, was not in the least disturbed. He kept turning his head left and right, but I could not see anything through the darkness. Suddenly, away on our left, I saw a faint flickering blue flame. The driver saw it at that moment. He at once checked the horses, and jumping to the ground disappeared into the darkness. I did not know what to do, lest the howling of the wolves grew closer. But while I wondered, the driver suddenly appeared again, and without a word took his seat, and we resumed our journey. I think I must have fallen asleep and kept dreaming of the incident, for it seemed to be repeated endlessly, and now looking back, it is sort of like an awful nightmare. Once the flame appeared, so near the road, so that even in the darkness, around us, I could watch the driver's motions. He went rapidly to where the blue flame arose. It must have been very faint, for it did not seem to illuminate the place around it at all. Gathering a few stones, formed them into some device. Once there appeared a strange optical effect. Then he stood between me and the flame. He did not obstruct it, for I could see its ghostly flicker. All the same, this startled me, but as the effect was only momentary, I took it that my eyes deceived me in the straining through the darkness. Then for a time there were no blue flames, and we sped onwards through the gloom. The howling of the wolves around us, as though we were following a moving circle. At last there came a time when the driver went further afield than he had gone. During his absence, the horses began to tremble worse than ever and to snort and scream with fright. I could not see any cause for it, for the howling of the wolves had ceased altogether. But just then, the moon, sailing through the black clouds, appeared behind the jagged crest of a beetling, pine-clad rock. And by its light, I saw a ring of wolves, with white teeth and lolling red tongues, with long, sinewy limbs and shaggy hair. They were 100 times more terrible than the grim silence which held them, even when they howled. For myself, I felt a sort of paralysis of fear. It is only when a man... It is only when a man feels himself face to face with such horrors that he can understand their true import. All at once, the wolves began to howl, as though the moonlight had some peculiar effect on them. The horses jumped about and reared and looked helplessly round with eyes that rolled in a way painful to see. But the living ring of terror encompassed them on every side, and they had perforce on every side. Encompassed them on every side, and they had perforce to remain within it. I called to the coachman, comfort, to seem to me that our only chance was to break out through the ring, and to aid his approach. I shouted and beat the side of the caleche, hoping by the noise to scare the wolves from that side, so as to give him a chance of reaching the trap. How he came there, I know not, but I heard his voice, raised in a tone of imperious command. On looking towards the sound, saw him stand in the roadway. As he swept his long arms, as though brushing aside some impalpable obstacle, the wolves fell back, and further still. Just then a heavy cloud passed across the face of the moon, so that they were again in darkness. When I could see again, the driver was climbing into the caleche, and the wolves had disappeared. This was all so strange and uncanny that a dreadful fear came upon me, and I was afraid to speak or move. The time seemed so interminable as we swept on our way, now in almost complete darkness, for the rolling clouds obscured the moon. We kept on ascending, with the occasional periods of quick descent, but in the main always ascending. Suddenly, I became conscious of the fact that the driver was in the act of pulling up the horses of the courtyard of a fast ruined castle, for whose tall black windows came no ray of light, and whose broken battlements showed a jagged line against the moonlit sky. I must have been asleep, for certainly If I had been fully awake, I must have noticed the approach of such a remarkable place in the gloom of the courtyard. Looked of considerable size, and as several dark ways led from it underground, under great round arches, it perhaps seemed bigger than it really is. I have not yet been able to see it by daylight. When the caleche stopped, the driver jumped down and held out his hand to assist me to alight. Again, I could not but notice his prodigious strength. His hand actually seemed like a steel vise that could have crushed mine, if he had chosen. Then he took out my traps and placed them on the ground beside me. As I stood close to a great door, old and studded with large iron nails, and set in a projecting doorway of massive stone, I could not see that in the dim light of the stone was massively carved, but that the carving had been much worn by time and weather. As I stood, the driver jumped again into his seat and shook all the reins. The horses started forward, and trap all disappeared down one of the dark openings. I stood in silence where I was. I did not know what to do. Of bell or knocker there was no sign. Though these frowning walls and dark windows openings, it was not likely that my voice could penetrate. A time I waited seemed endless, and I felt doubts of fear crowding upon me. What sort of place had I come to, and among what kind of people? What sort of grim adventure was it on which I had embarked? Was this a customary incident of the life of a solicitor's clerk, sent out to explain the purchase of a London estate to a foreigner? Solicitor's clerk. Mina would not like that. Solicitor. For just before leaving London, I got word that my examination was successful and that I am now a full-blown solicitor. I began to rub my eyes and pinch myself to see if I were awake. And it had all seemed like a horrible nightmare to me, and I expected that I should suddenly awake and find myself again at home with the dawn struggling in through the windows. As I had now again felt in the morning after a day of overwork, but my flesh answered into the pinching test and my eyes were not to be deceived. I was indeed awake among the Parthians. All I could do now was be patient and wait the coming of the morning. Now, I am not a very good reader. Just as I had come to the conclusion, I heard a heavy step approaching behind the door, and saw through the chinks of the gleam of coming light that there was a sound of rattling chains and the clanking of massive bolts drawn back. A key turned with the loud grating noise of long disuse, and the great door swung back. Within stood a tall old man, clean-shaven for a long while. Clean-shaven, save for a long white mustache, and then clad in black from head to foot, without a single speck of color about him anywhere. He held in his hand an antique silver lamp, in which the flame had burned, without chimney or globe of any kind, throwing long quivering shadows as it flickered in the draught of the open door. The old man motioned me with his right hand with a courtesy gesture, saying in excellent English, but with a strange intonation, "Welcome to my house. Enter freely of your own free will. Enter freely and of your own will." He made no notion of stepping to meet me, but stood like a statue as though his gesture of welcoming had fixed him into stone. The instant, however, that I had stepped over the threshold, he moved impulsively forward, and holding his hand, grasped mine with a strength which made me wince, an effect which was not lessened by the fact that it seemed as cold as ice, more like the hand of a dead man, dead than a living man. Again he said, "Welcome to my house. Come freely, go safely. and leave something of the happiness you bring. Okay. Hopefully go safely, leave something of the happiness you bring. The strength of the handshake was so much akin to that which I had noticed in the driver, whose face was I had not seen, that for a moment I doubted if they were not the same person whom I was speaking interrogatively. Count Dracula? He bowed in a courtly way as you replied, I am Dracula, and I bid you your welcome. So we get to meet Dracula. Mr. Harker, to my house. Come in. The night air is chill. You must need to eat and rest. As he was speaking, he put the lamp on a bracket on the wall and, stepping out, took my luggage, and he carried out in before. I could forestall him. I protested, but he insisted. Nay, sir, you are my guest. It is late, and my people are not available. Let me see to your comfort myself. He insisted on carrying my traps along with the passage, and then up a great winding stair, and along another great passage, on whose stone floor our steps rang heavily. At the end of this, he threw open a heavy door and rejoiced to see within a well-lit room, which a table was spread for supper, on whose mighty hearth of great fire logs, freshly replenished, flamed and flared. Things are falling. The Count halted, putting down my bags, and closed the door, crossing the room, opened another door which led into a small octagonal room lit by a single lamp, and seemingly without a window of any sort. Passing through this, he opened another door and motioned me to enter. It was a welcome sight, for here was a great bedroom, well lighted and warmed with another log of fire. Also added to, but lately, for the top logs were fresh, which sent a hollow roar up the wide chimney. The Count himself left my luggage inside and withdrew, staying before I closed the door. You will need, after your journey, to refresh yourself by making your toilet. I trust you will find all you wish. When you are ready, come into the other room, where you will find your supper prepared. The light and warmth of the Count's courteous welcome seemed to have dissipated all my doubts and fears, having them reach my normal state. I discovered that I was half famished with hunger, so making a hasty toilet, I ran into the other room. I found supper already laid out. My host, who stood at one side of the great fireplace leaning against the stonework, made graceful wave of his hand to the table and said, I pray you, be seated and sup how you please. You will, I trust, excuse me that I do not join you, but I have dined already, and I do not sup. I handed to him the sealed letter which Mr. Hawkins had entrusted to me. He opened it and read it gravely, and then with a charming smile, he handed it to me to read. One passage of it, at least, gave me a thrill of pleasure. I must regret that an attack of gout, from which malady I am a constant sufferer, forbids absolutely any traveling on my part for some time to come, but I am happy to say that I can send a sufficient substitute, one in whom I have every possible confidence. He is a young man, full of energy and talent, in his own way, and of a very faithful disposition. He is discreet and silent, and has grown into manhood into my service. He will be ready to attend you, and you will during his stay, and shall take your instructions in all matters. The Count himself came forward and took off the cover of a dish, and I fell to once on an excellent roast of chicken. This with some cheese and salad and a bottle of old Tokay, of which I had 2 glasses, and was my supper. During the time I was eating, the Count asked me many questions as my journey, and I told him by degrees I had experience. By this time I had finished my supper, and my host's desire had drawn up a chair by the fire and began to smoke a cigar, which he offered me, at the same time excusing himself that he did not smoke. Excusing himself that he did not smoke. I had now an opportunity of observing him, and found him a very marked physiognomy. His face was very strong, aquiline, with high bridge of the thin nose, and peculiarly arched nostrils, with lofty domed forehead, and hair growing scantily around the temples, but profusely elsewhere. His eyebrows were massive, almost meeting over the nose, and with bushy hair that seemed to curl in its own profusion. The mouth, so far as I could see, under a heavy mustache, was fixed and rather cruel-looking, peculiarly shaped, sharp, white teeth. These protruded over the lips, whose remarkable ruddiness showed astonishingly vitality in a man of his years. For the rest, his ears were pale, and the tops extremely pointed, and the chin was broad, and the cheeks firm, though thin. The general effect was one of extraordinarily pallor. Hitherto, I had noticed from the backs of his hands, as they lay on his knees in the firelight, that they had seemed rather white and fine, but seeing them now close to me, I could not but notice that they were rather coarse, broad with squat fingers. Strange to say, there were hairs in the center of the palm. The nails were long and fine, and cut to a sharp point. As the Count leaned over to me, his hands touched, and I could not repress a shudder. It may have been that his breath was rank, but a horrible feeling of nausea came over me, which do what I would, I could not conceal. The Count, evidently noticing it, drew back with a grim sort of smile, which showed more than he had done in his protuberant teeth, sat himself down again on his own side of the fireplace. We were both silent for a while, and as I looked towards the window, I saw the first dim streak of the coming dawn. There seemed to be a strange stillness over everything, but I listened. I heard, as if from down in the valley, the howling of many wolves. The Count's eyes gleamed, and he said, "Listen to them, the children of the night. What music they make." Seeing, I suppose, some of the expression in my face strange to him, he added, "Ah, sir, you dwellers in the city cannot enter into the feelings of the hunter." Then he rose and said, "But you must be tired. Your bedroom is all ready, and tomorrow you shall sleep as late as you will. I have to be away till the afternoon, so sleep well, and dream well." With a courteous bow, he opened for me himself, the door of the octagonal room, and entered my bedroom. And I entered my bedroom. I am all in a sea of wonders. I doubt, I fear, I think strange things, which I dare not confess to my own soul. God keep me, if only for the sake of those dear to me. Hello. We're reading Dracula today. We just met Dracula. Hydrate, arigato. Thank you for the hydrate. So I would like to stream until 2 p.m. Then I can go eat. We're starting here. 7th of May. It is again early morning, but I have rested and enjoyed the last 24 hours. I sleep till late in the day and awoke of my own accord. When I had dressed myself, I went into the room and we had supped and found a cold breakfast laid out, with coffee kept hot by the pot being placed on the hearth. There was a card on the table on which was written, I have to be absent for a while. Do not wait for me. D. There's something I like about him just signing D. It's funny to me. I set to and enjoyed a hearty meal. When I had done, I looked for a bell so that I might let the servants know I had finished, but I could not find one. There are certainly odd deficiencies in the house, considering the extraordinary evidences of wealth which are around me. The table service is of gold and so beautifully wrought that it must be of immense value. The curtains and the upholstery of the chairs and sofas of the hangings of my bed, of the costliest and the most beautiful fabrics. It must have been of fabulous value when they were made, for they are centuries old, though in excellent order. I saw something like them in Hampton Court, but there they were worn and frayed and moth-eaten. But still none of the rooms is there a mirror, and not even a toilet glass on my table. And I have had to get the little shaving glass from my bag before I could either shave or brush my hair. I have not seen a servant anywhere, or heard a sound near my castle, except the howling of wolves. Sometime after I had finished my meal, I do not know whether to call it breakfast or dinner, for it was between 5 and 6 o'clock when I had had it. I looked about for something to read, for I did not like to go about the castle until I had asked the Count's permission. There was absolutely nothing in the room, book, newspaper, or even writing materials, so I had opened another door in the room and found a sort of library. A door opposite mine. I tried but found it locked. In the library, I found to my great delight a vast number of English books, whole shelves of them, and the bound volumes of magazines and newspapers. A table in the center was littered with English magazines and newspapers, though none of them were of very recent date. The books were of the most varied kinds: history, geography, politics, political economy, botany, geology, law, all relating to England and English life, and customs and manners. There was even such books of versions as the London Rectory, the Red and Blue books, Whitaker's Almanac, the Army and Navy lists, and it somehow gladdened my heart to see it, the law list. Whilst I was looking at the books, the door opened and the Count entered. He saluted me in a hearty way and hoped that I had a good night's rest. Then he went on, I am glad you found your way here, for I am sure that there is much that will interest you. These companions, he laid his hand on some of the books, have been good friends to me, and for some years past, ever since I had the idea of going to London, had given me many hours of pleasure. Through them, I have come to know your great England, and to know her is to love her. I long to go through the crowded streets of your mighty London, to be in the midst of the world and the rest of humanity, to share its life and change its death, and all that makes it what it is. But alas, as I have yet to only know your tongue through books. To you, my friend, I noticed it to speak. But Count, I said, you know and speak English thoroughly. He bowed gravely. I thank you, my friend, for your all too flattering estimate, but yet I fear that I am but a little way on the road I would travel. True. I know the grammar and the words, but yet I know not how to speak them. Indeed, I said, you speak excellently. No, not so. Not so. I can't even speak it. Not so, he answered. Well, I know that, did I move and speak in your London, none there who would not know me for a stranger. That is not enough for me. Here I am noble, I am boyar. The common people know me, and I am master, but a stranger in a strange land, he is no one. Men know him not, and know not is not to care not for. I am content that if I am like the rest, so that no man stops if he sees me or pause me on this speaking. If he hears my words, haha, a stranger, I have been so long master that I would be master still, or at least that none other should be master of me. You come to me and not alone, as agent of my friend Peter Hawkins, of Exeter, to tell me about my new estate in London. You shall, I trust, rest here with me a while, so that by our talking I may learn the English notation. And I would that you tell me when I make an error, even though the smallest in my speaking. I am sorry that I am to be away so long today, but you will know I forgive one who has so many important affairs in hand. Of course, I said all I could about being willing, and asked if I might come into the room when I chose. He answered, yes, certainly, and added, you may go anywhere and you wish in the castle except where the doors are locked, where of course you will not wish to go. There is reason that all things are as they are, and you did not see with my eye. And did you see with my eyes, know with my knowledge, you would perhaps better understand. I said I was sure of this, and he went on. We are in Transylvania, and Transylvania is not England. Our ways are not your ways, and there shall be to you many strange things. Nay, from what you have told me, your experiences already, you know something of what strange things there may be. This led to much conversation, and as it was evident, he wanted to talk, if only for talking's sake. I asked him many questions regarding things that had already happened to me, or come within my notice. Sometimes he sheered off the subject, or turned the conversation by pretending not to understand. But generally he answered all. I asked most frankly. Then as time went on, I had got somewhat bolder. I asked him some of the strange things of the preceding night. As for instance, why the coachman went on to the places where he had seen the blue flames. He explained to me that it was common belief that on a certain night of the year, last night, in fact, when all evil spirits are supposed to have unchecked sway. A blue flame is seen over any place where the treasure has been concealed. The treasure has been hidden, he went on, in the region through which you have come through last night. There can be as little doubt it was on the ground, fought over for centuries by the Wallachia, the Saxon, and the Turk. Why there is hardly a foot of soil in this region that has not been enriched by the blood of men, patriots, or invaders. In old days, there were stirring times when the Austrian and Hungarian came up in hordes, and the patriots went out to meet them, men and women, the aged, the children too, and waited their coming out on the rocks above the passes, that they might sweep destruction on them with their artificial avalanches. When the invader was triumphant, he found but little for whatever there had been sheltered in the friendly soil. But how, said I, can it have remained so long undiscovered, when there is a sure index to it if men will but take the trouble to look? The Count smiled, and his lips ran back over his gums. The long, sharp canine teeth showed out strangely as he answered. Because your peasant is at heart a coward and a fool. The flames only appear on one night, and on that night no man of this land will, if he can help it, stir without his doors. And dear sir, even if he did, he will not know what to do. Why, even the peasant that you tell me of who marked the place of the flame will not know where to look in the daylight, even for his own work. Even you would not, I dare be sworn, be able to find these places again. There you are right, I said. I know no more than the dead where even to look for them. Then he drifted into other matters. Come, he said at last, tell me of London, and of the house which you have procured for me. With an apology of my remissness, I went into my own room to get the papers from my bag. Whilst I was placing them in order, I heard a rattling of china and silver in the next room. As I passed through, noticed that the table had been cleared of the lamplit, for this was by this time deep into the dark. The lamps are also lit in the study or library, and I found the Count laying on the sofa reading all of the things in the world. An English Bradshaw's Guide. When I came in, he cleared the books and papers from the table, and with him I went into the plans and deeds and figures of all sorts. He was interested in everything and asked me a myriad of questions about the place and its surroundings. He clearly had to study beforehand all he could get into the subject of the neighborhood, for he evidently, at the end, knew very much more than I did. When I remarked, he answered, Well, but, my friend, is it not needful that I should... When I go there, I shall be alone, and my friend Harker Jonathan... Nay, pardon me, I've fallen into my country's habit of putting your patronymic first. My friend, Jonathan Harker, will not be by my side to correct and aid me. He will be my Exeter, miles away, probably working at papers for the law with my other friend, Peter Hawkins, so... We went through into the business of the purchase and the estate at Purfleet. When I had told him the facts and got his signature to the necessary papers, and had written a letter to them ready to post to Mr. Hawkins, he began to ask me how it came across suddenly, how I came across so suitable a place. I read to him the notes which I had made at the time, and which I inscribe here. At Purfleet, on a by-road, I came across such a place as seemed to be required, and where was displayed a dilapidated notice that the place was for sale. It is surrounded by a high wall of ancient structure built of heavy stones, and has not been prepared for a large number of years. The closed gates are of heavy old oak, and iron, and all eaten with rust. The estate is called Carfax, no doubt a corruption of the Quatreface. Catfas. As the house is four-sided, agreeing with the cardinal points of the compass. It contains all some 20 acres, quite surrounded by the solid stone above the mentioned. There are many trees on it, which make it in places gloomy, and there's a deep, dark-looking pond or small lake evidently fed by some springs. As the water is clear and flows away in a fair-sized stream, this house is very large and of all periods back, I should say medieval times. For one part, it is of stone immensely thick, with only a few windows high up, and heavily barred with iron. It looks like a part of keep, and is close to an old chapel or church. I could not enter it, as I had not the key of the door leading to it from the house, but I have taken with my Kodak views of it from various points. The house had been added to, but in a very straggling way. I can only guess at the amount of ground it covers, which must be very great, but there are very few houses close at hand. One being very large house, only recently added to and formed onto a private lunatic asylum. It is not, however, visible from high grounds. When I had finished, he said, "I am glad it is old and big. I myself am of an old family, and do live in a new house would kill me. And to live in a new house would kill me. A house cannot be made habitable in a day. And after all, how few days go to make up a century. I rejoice also that there is a chapel of old times. We Transylvanian nobles love not to go to think that our bones may lie amongst the common dead. I seek not gaiety nor mirth, not the bright voluptuousness of much sunshine and sparkling waters, which please the young and gay. I am no longer young in my heart. The weary years of mourning over the dead is not attuned to mirth. Moreover, the walls of my castle are broken, and the shadows are many, and the wind breathes cold through the broken battlements and casements. I love the shade and shadow, and would be alone with my thoughts when I made. Somehow his words did not seem to accord, or else it was that his cast of face made his smile look malignant and saturnine. Presently, with an excuse, he left me asking to put all my papers together. He was some little time away. I began to look at some of the books around me. One was an atlas, which I found open naturally at England, as if that map had been much used. On looking at it, I found in certain places little rings marked with, and on examining these, I noticed that one was near London, on the east side, manifestly where his new estate was situated. The other two were Exeter and Whitby, on the Yorkshire coast. It was the better part of an hour when the Count returned. "Aha!" he said, "still at your books? Good. But you must not work always. Come, I am informed that your supper is ready." He took my arm and went into the next room, where I found an excellent supper ready at the table. The Count again excused himself, as he had dined on his being away from home. But he sat as on the previous night, and chatted whilst I ate. After supper I smoked, as on the last evening, and the Count stayed with me, chatting and asking questions on every conceivable subject, hour after hour. I felt it was getting very late indeed, but I did not say anything, for I felt under obligation to meet my host's wishes in every way. I was not sleepy, as a long sleep yesterday had fortified me, but I could not help experiencing that chill which comes over me at the coming of the dawn. which is like in its way the turn of the tide. They say that people who are near death, or generally at the changes of the dawn, but they say that people who are near death generally die generally at the change to the dawn, or the turn of the tide. Anyone who has when tired and tied as a word to his post experienced this change in the atmosphere can well believe it. All at once we heard the crow of a cock coming up with preternatural shrillness through the clear morning air. Count Dracula, jumping to his feet, said, "Why, there is the morning again. How remiss I am to let you stay up so long. You must make conversation regarding my new country of England less interesting so that I may not forget how time flies by us." And with a courtly bow, he quickly left me. I went into my own room and drew the curtains, but there was little to no notice. My window opened into the courtyard, and I could see was the warm gray of the quickening sky. So I pulled the curtains again and have written this day. I'm going to take a quick break. And we'll start where it says 8th of May. I'm back. So it's 12:30. My package was supposed to be here by 12. We'll check it again. We'll check Amazon. Arriving today. Oh, it just says arriving today. So I don't know when it'll get here. Hopefully they can just put it in my mailbox. It seems small enough. Okay. I began to fear, as I wrote in this book, that I was getting too diffuse. But now I'm glad I went into detail from the first. But there is something so strange about this place. And all in it, I cannot but feel uneasy. I wish I were safe out of it, but I had never come. It may be strange that this strange night existence is telling on me. But I would... that there were all. If there were anyone to talk to, I could bear it, but there is no one. I have only the Count to speak with, and he, I fear. I am myself and the only living soul in this place. Let me be prosaic, so far as facts can be. It will help me bear up, and imagination must not run right with me. If it does, I am lost. Let me say at once how I stand, or seems to. I only slept a few hours when I went to bed, and feeling that I could not sleep anymore, got up. I had hung my shaving glass by the window, and was beginning to shave. Suddenly I felt a hand on my shoulder, and heard the Count's voice say to me, "Good morning." I started for it, and amazed me that I had not seen him, since the reflection of the glass covered the whole room behind me. In starting, I had cut myself slightly, but I did not notice it at the moment. Having answered the Count's salutation, I returned to the glass again to see how I had been mistaken. This time there could be no error, for the man was close to me, and I could not see him over my shoulder. But there was no reflection of him in the mirror. This whole room was behind me was displayed, but there was no sign of a man in it except for myself. This was startling, and coming on top of many strange things, I was beginning to increase the vague feeling of uneasiness, which I always have when the Count is near. But at the instant I saw that the cut had bled a little, and the blood was trickling over my chin. I laid down the razor, turning as I did half around to look for some sticking plaster. When the Count saw my face, his eyes blazed with a sort of demoniac fury, and he suddenly made a grab at my throat. I drew away my hand. I drew away his hand, touched at the string of my beads, which held my crucifix. It made an instant change for him, and the fury passed so quickly I could hardly believe it was ever there. We're almost to chapter 3. "Take care," he said. "Take care how you cut yourself. It is more dangerous than you think in this country." Then seizing the shaving glass, he went on. "And this wretched thing has done the mischief. It is a foul bubble of man's vanity. Away with it!" And opening in the heavy window with one wrench of his terrible hand, he flung out the glass, which shattered into 1,000 pieces on the stone of the courtyard far below. He had withdrew a word. Then he withdrew without a word. It is very annoying, for I do not see how I am to shave unless in my watch case or the bottom of the shaving pot, which is fortunately of metal. When I went into the dining room, breakfast was prepared, but I could not find the Count anywhere, so I breakfasted alone. It is strange that yet I have not seen the Count eat or drink. It must be a very peculiar man. After breakfast, I did a little exploring in the castle. I went out on the stairs and found a room looking towards the south. The view was magnificent, and from where I stood, there was every opportunity of seeing it. The castle is on the very edge of a terrible precipice. A stone falling from the window would fall 1,000 feet without touching anything. As far as the eye can reach, a sea of green tree tops, with occasionally a deep rift where there is a chasm. Here and there are silver bee threads where the rivers wind in deep gorges through the forest. But I am not in a heart to describe, for when I had seen the view, I explored further. Doors and doors everywhere, and all locked and bolted in place, save from the windows in the castle where there is an available exit. The castle is a veritable prison, and I'm a prisoner. Starting here. Jonathan Harker's journal continued. When I found that I was a prisoner of a sort of wild feeling come over me. I rushed up and down the stairs, trying every door and peering out of every window I could find. But after a little, the conviction of my helplessness overpoured all other feelings. When I looked back there after a few hours, I think I must have been mad for the time. For I behaved much as a rat does in a trap. When, however, the conviction had come to me that I was helpless, I sat down quietly as I had ever done in anything in my life, and began to think over what was best to be done. I am thinking still, and as yet to come to no definite conclusion. Of one thing I am only certain, that it is no use making my ideas known to the Count. He knows well that I am imprisoned, and he has done it himself, and has doubtless his own motives for it. He would only deceive me if I trusted him fully with the facts. So as far as I can see, my only plan will be to keep my knowledge and my fears to myself. In my eyes open, I know, either being deceived like a baby by my own fears, or else I am in desperate straits. And if the latter be so, I need and shall need all my brains to get through. I had hardly come to this conclusion when I heard the great door below shut. I knew that the Count had returned. He had not come at once into the library, so I went cautiously to my own room and found him making the bed. This was odd, but only confirmed that I had all along thought. There were no servants in the house. When later I saw him through the chink of the hinges, the door laying the table of the dining room, I was assured of it. For if he does himself all these menial offices, surely it is proof that there is no one else to do them. This gave me a fright, for if there is no one else in the castle, it must have been the Count himself who was the driver of the coach that had brought me here. This is a terrible thought, for if so, what does it mean that he could control the wolves, as he did, by only holding up his hand in silence? How was it that all the people at Bistra's and on the coach had some terrible fear of me, but meant the giving of the crucifix, of the garlic, of the wild rose, of the mountain ash? Bless that good woman who hung the crucifix round my neck. for it is a comfort and a strength to me whenever I touched it. It is odd that a thing, which I have been taught to regard with disfavor as adulterous, should in a time of loneliness and trouble help. Is it that there is something of essence of the thing that hung itself, the thing itself, or is it a medium, a tangible help in the conveying memories of sympathy and comfort? Some time of it may be examined for this matter, and try to come up with my mind about it. In the meantime, I must find out all I can about Count... Chotto hayasugiru. I must find out all I can about Count Dracula, as it may help to understand. Tonight he may talk of himself. If I turn the conversation that way, I must be very careful not to awake his suspicion. Midnight. I had a long talk with the Count. I asked him a few questions on Transylvanian history, and he warmed up to the subject wonderfully. And he's speaking of things and people, especially of battles. He spoke as if he had been present at them all. This, he afterwards explained by saying that to Boyer, the pride of his house in the name of his own pride, that their glory is his glory, that their fate is his fate. Whenever he spoke of his house, he always said we and spoke almost in the plural, like a king speaking. I wish I could put it down, all he said exactly as he said it for me. It was most fascinating. It seemed to have in it a whole history of the country. He grew excited as he spoke, and walked about the room, pulling his great white mustache, and grasping anything on which he laid his hands, as though he would crush it by the main strength. One thing he said, which I shall put down nearly as I can, for it tells in his way the story of his race. We Czechs have a right to be proud, for in our veins flow the blood of many brave races, who fought as a lion fights for lordship. Here in the whirlpool of European races, the Ugric tribe bore down from Iceland, and the fighting spirits which Thornwoden gave them, which their berserkers displayed to such a full intent on the seaboards of Europe. Aye, and of Asia and Africa too, till the peoples thought that the werewolves themselves had come. Here too, when they came, they found the Huns, whose warlike fury had swept the earth like a living flame, till the dying people held that in their veins ran the blood of those old witches, who expelled from Scythia and had mated with the devils in the desert. Fools! Fools! What devil or what witch was ever so great as Attila, whose blood is in these veins? He held up his arms. Is it wonder that we were a conquering race, that we were proud of when the Magyar, the Lombard, the Avar, the Bulgar, or the Turk poured his thousands on our frontiers? We drove them back? Is it strange that when Arpad and his legions slept through the Hungarian fatherlands, he found us here when he reached the frontier? I looked away for a second and I lost my spot. That the Honfoglalas was completed there, and when the Hungarian flood swept eastward, Czechs were claimed as kindred by the victorious Magyars. And to us for centuries was it trusted the guarding of the frontier of Turkey land. Aye, and more than that, endless duty of the frontier guard. For, as the Turks say, water sleeps and the enemy is sleepless. Who more gladly than we throughout the four nations receive the bloody sword, or at its warlike call, flocked quicker to the standard of the king. When was redeemed the great shame of my nation, the shame of Casanova, when the flags of Wallach Namagia went down beneath the crescent? Who was it but the one of my own race, as the Voivod crossed the Danube and beat the Turk on his own ground? This was a Dracula, indeed. Well, was it that of his own worthy brother when he had sold his people to the Turk and brought the shame of the slavery on them? Was it not this Dracula, indeed, who inspired the other of his race, who in a later age again brought his forces over the great river into Turkey land? Who, when he had beaten back, came again and again, though he had to come alone from the bloody field where his troops were being slaughtered, since he knew that he alone could ultimately triumph. They said that he thought only of himself. Bah! What good are the peasants without a leader? Where ends the war without a brain and heart to conduct it? Again, when, after the battles of Mohacs, he threw off the Hungarian yoke, we of the Dracula blood were amongst their leaders, for our spirits would not brook, though we were not free. Ah, young sir, for the sake of Shekgales, the Dracula, as their hearts, blood, their brains, and their swords, can boast a record that mushrooms growth like the Habsburgs and the Romanovs can never reach. The warlike days are over. Blood is too precious a thing these days of this honorable place. And the glories of the great races, as a tale is that is told. It was by this time close on morning when we went to bed. This diary seems to be horribly like the beginning of the Arabian Nights, for every time everything has to break off at cockcrow, or the ghost like Hamlet's father. Nagakata. Just taking a quick break. I'm not sure how far I'll get. I have 1 more hour left. You're over here. I wanted to get to the top of the stream page. I can't. I'm getting hungry. Made a lot of progress. I'll have to take a note of how far I get. I'm reading this for the first time. You haven't read it in a long time. I have the Japanese version, the translation of Dracula. If I read that version on my own, then I won't get farther than this. I have other books I want to read that I never read before. I think my throat really is getting dry. This is a lot to read. I'll make tea next time. I just have 1 more hour left. I was muted. I'll make tea right now. Dewa, 戻ってきました. I'm back. Wrong screen. Let me begin with facts. Bare meager facts. Verified by the books and figures, and of which there can be no doubt. I must not confuse them with experience, which will have not rest on my own observations, or my memory of them. Last evening, when the Count came from his room, he began by asking me questions on legal matters, and the doing of certain kinds of business. I had spent the day wearily over books, and simply to keep my mind occupied, went over some of the matters. I had been examining at Lincoln's Inn. There had been a certain method in the Count's inquiries, so I shall try to put them down in sequence. The knowledge may somehow or some time be useful to me. First he asked if a man in England might have 2 solicitors or more. I told him he might have a dozen if he wished, and that he would not be wise to have more than 1 solicitor engaged in one transaction, as only one could act at a time, and that to change would be certain to militate against his interest. He seemed thoroughly to understand and went on to ask if there would be any practical difficulty in having one man to attend, say, to banking, and another to look after shipping in case local help were needed, in a place far from the home of the banking solicitor. I asked him to explain more carefully so I might not chance to mislead him, so he said, I shall illustrate your friend and mine, Mr. Peter Hawkins, from under the shadow of your beautiful cathedral at Exeter, from which is far from London. Buys from me through your good self, my place at London. Good. Now here, let me say frankly, lest you should think it strange that I have sought the services of one so far from London. Of some one resident there. That my motives was no local interest might be served. Save my wish only as one of London's residents might perhaps have some purpose for himself to serve. I went thus afield to seek my agent, whose labors should be only to my interest. Now suppose I have much affairs, wish to ship goods, say, to Newcastle, Durham, or Harwich, or Dover. Might it not be that it could be more with ease or done consigning to one of these ports? I answered that certainly it would be most easy that we solicitors had a system of agency, one for the other, so that local work could be done locally on instruction from any solicitor, so that the client, simply placing himself in the hands of one man, could have his wishes carried out by him and without further trouble. But, he said, I could be at liberty to direct myself, is it not so? Of course, I replied. Such is often done by men of business, who do not like the whole of the affairs to be known by any one person. Good, he said. We went on to ask about the means of making consignments, and the forms to be gone through, and all sorts of difficulties which might arise, but by forethought could be guarded against, explained by these things to him, to the best of my ability, and he would certainly left me under the impression that he would have made a wonderful solicitor. There was nothing that he did not think or foresee. For a man who was never in the country, and who did not evidently do much in the way of business, his knowledge and acumen were wonderful. And when he satisfied on all these points of which he had spoken, I had verified as well that I could buy the books available. He suddenly stood up and said, Have you written since your first letter to our friend, Mr. Peter Hawkins, or to any other? It was with some bitterness in my heart that I answered that I had not. As yet, I had not seen any opportunity of sending letters to anybody. Then write now, my young friend, he said, laying a heavy hand on my shoulder. Write to our friend, to any other, and say if it will please you, and you shall stay with me until a month from now. Do you wish me to stay longer? I asked. My heart grew cold at the thought. I desire much. Nay, I will take no refusal. When your master employer, when you will engage with someone, should come on his behalf. It was understood that my needs were to only be consulted. I have not stinted, if not so. Is that not so? What could I do but bow acceptance? It was Mr. Hawkins' interest, not mine, that I had think of him, not myself. Besides, while Count Dracula was speaking, there was that in his eyes, in his bearing, which made me remember that I was a prisoner, and if I wished it, could have no choice. The Count saw his victory in my bow, and his mastery in the trouble of my face, for he began at once to use them, but in his own smooth, resistless way. I pray you, my good young friend, that you will not discourse of things other than business in your letters. It will doubtless please your friends to know that you are well, and that you look forward to getting home to them. Is it not so? As he spoke, he handed me 3 sheets of notepaper and 3 envelopes, and they were all of the thinnest foreign post. And looking at them, then noticing his quiet smile with the sharp canine teeth lying over a red underlip, I understood as well as if he had spoken that he should be careful that what I wrote, for you would be able to read it, so I determined to write only formal notes. Now, but to write fully to Mr. Hawkins in secret, and also to Mina. For her, I could write in shorthand, which would puzzle the Count if he did not see it. If he did see it. When I had written my 2 letters, I sat quiet reading a book, whilst the Count wrote several notes, referring as he wrote them to some books on his table. He took up my 2 and placed them in his own hand and put by his writing materials, after which the instant the door closed behind him, I leaned over and looked at the letters, which were face down on the table. I felt no compunction in doing so, for under the circumstances I felt that I should protect myself in every way I could. One of the letters was directed to Samuel F. Billington, number 7. The Crescent would be another Erlutner, Varna. The third was to Codis & Co., London, and the fourth to Heron Klopstock and Bilroth, bankers, Budapest, and the second and fourth were unsealed. I was just about to look at them when I saw the door handle move. I sank back in my seat, having just had time to replace the letters as they had been, and to resume my book before the Count, holding still another letter in his hand, entered the room, and he took up the letters and table and stamped them carefully, and returning to me and said, "I trust you will forgive me, but I have much work to do in private this evening. You will, I hope, find all the things you wish." At the door he turned, and after a moment's pause he said, "Let me advise you, my dear young friend. Nay, let me warn you with all seriousness. Should you leave these rooms, and you will not by any chance go to sleep in any other part of the castle. It is old, and has many memories, and there are bad dreams. For those who sleep unwisely, be warned. You should sleep now, or ever overcome you, and be like to do, then haste to your own chamber of these rooms. For your rest will then be safe. But if you be not careful in this respect, then..." He finished with his speech in a gruesome way, for he motioned his hand as if he were washing them. I understood. My only doubt was as to whether any dream could be more terrible than the unnatural, horrible net of gloom and mystery which seemed closing around me. Later, I endorsed the last words written, but this time there was no doubt in question. I shall not fear to sleep in any place where he is not. I have placed a crucifix over the head of my bed. I imagine that my rest is thus freer from dreams, and it shall remain. When he left me, I went to my room, and after a little while, not hearing any sound, I came out and went up to the stone stair, where I could look out towards the south. There was some sort of freedom in the vast expanse, inaccessible though it was to me, compared with the narrow darkness of the courtyard. Looking out on this, I felt that I was indeed in prison, and I seemed to want a breath of fresh air. Though it were of the night, I am beginning to feel this nocturnal existence tell on me. It is destroying my nerve. I start at my own shadow, and am full of sorts of horrible imaginings. God knows there is ground for a terrible fear in this accursed place. I looked over at the beautiful expanse, bathed in it, soft yellow moonlight, till it was almost as light as day. In the soft light, the distant hills became melted, and the shadows in the valleys and the gorges of velvety blackness. The mere beauty seemed to cheer me. There was peace and comfort in every breath I drew. As I leaned from the window, my eye was caught by something moving a story below me, and something to my left, where I imagined from the order of the rooms that the windows of the Count's own room would look out. The window at which I stood was tall and deep, stone mullioned, and though weather-worn was still complete, but it was evidently many a day since the case had been there. I drew back, and there, behind the stonework, looked carefully out. What I saw was the Count's head coming out from the window. I did not see the face, but I knew the man by the neck and the movement of his back and arms. In any case, I could not mistake the hands of which I had many opportunities of studying. I was at first interested and somewhat amused, for it's wonderful how small a matter will interest and amuse a man when he is a prisoner. But my very feelings changed to repulsion and terror when I saw the whole man slowly emerge from the window and begin to crawl down the castle over that dreadful abyss, face down, with the cloak spreading around him like great wings. At first I could not believe my eyes. I thought it was some sort of trick of the moonlight, some weird effect of the shadow, but I kept looking and it could be no delusion. I saw the fingers and toes grasp the corners of the stone, worn clear of the mortar and stress of the years, and thus using every projection and inequality move downwards at considerable speed, just as a lizard moves along a wall. What manner of man is this, or what manner of creature is it in the semblance of a man? I feel the dread of this horrible place overpowering me. I am in fear, in awful fear, and there is no escape for me. I am encompassed about with terrors that I dare not think of. I'm going to make tea. ちょっと待って。戻ってきました。How much longer is this? I think I'll stop here. Well, depending on how long it takes. I would like to stop at 2 p.m. So that way I can go eat. And then next week, we can continue reading. Once more, I've seen the Count go out in his lizard fashion. He moved downwards in a sidelong way, some 100 feet down, and a good deal to the left. He vanished into some hole or window. When his head had disappeared, he leaned out to try to see more, but without avail. The distance was too great to allow a proper angle of sight. I knew he had left the castle, and now was ought to use the opportunity to explore more than I had dared to do as yet. I went back to the room, taking a lamp, tried all the doors. They were all locked, as I expected, and the locks were comparatively new. But I went down the stone stairs to the hall where I had entered. Originally I had found I could pull back to the bolts easily. enough and unhooked the great chains, but the door was locked, and the key was gone. The key must be in the Count's room. I must watch should his door be unlocked, so that I may get it and escape. I went on to make a thorough examination of the various stairs and passages, and tried the doors that opened from them. One or two small rooms near the hall were open. There was nothing to see in them except old furniture and dusty with age and moth-eaten. At last, however, I found one door at the top of the stairway, which, though it seemed to be locked, gave a little under pressure. I tried it harder and found that it was not really locked. But that resistance came from the fact that the hinges had fallen somewhat, and the heavy door rested on the floor. Here was an opportunity which I might not have again. So I exerted myself and with many efforts forced it back so that I could enter. I was now in a wing of the castle further to the right than the rooms I knew, and a story lower down. From the windows I could see that the suite of rooms lay along the south of the castle. The windows at the end of the room looking out both west and south. On the latter side, as well as the former, there is a great precipice. The castle was built on the corner of a great rock, so that these three sides it was quite impregnable, and great windows were placed here and where sling or bow or culverin could not reach, and consequently light and comfort impossible to a position which had to be guarded were secured. To the west was a great valley, and then rising far away great jagged mountains, fastness, rising peak on peak, sheer rock-studded mountain, ash and thorn, whose roots clung in the cracks and crevices and crannies of the stone. This was evidently the portion of the castle occupied by the ladies in the bygone days. The furniture had more of an air of comfort than any I had seen. The windows were curtainless, and the yellow moonlight flooding in through the diamond panes enabled one to see even colors whilst it softened the wealth of dust which lay over the skies in some measure. The ravages of time and moth. My lamp seemed to be of little effect in the brilliant moonlight, but I was glad to have it with me, for there was a dread loneliness in the place which chilled my heart and made my nerves tremble. Still, it was better than living alone in the rooms which I had come to hate from the presence of the Count, and after trying little to school my nerves, I found a soft quietude come over me. Here I am sitting at a little oak table, where in old times possibly some fairy lady sat to pen, which with much thought and many blushes, her ill-spec love letter and writing in my diary in shorthand. All that has happened since it closed at last. It is 19th century up to date with a vengeance, and yet, unless my senses deceive me, the old centuries had and have powers of their own which me, where modernity cannot kill. 飲みます。Later, the morning of 16th of May. God preserve my sanity. For this I am reduced. Safety and the assurance of safety are things of the past. Whilst I have lived here, there's one thing to hope for. I may not go mad. If indeed I be not mad already. If I be sane, then surely it is maddening to think of all the foul things that lurk in the hateful place. The Count is the least dreadful to me. That to him alone I can look for safety, even though it be only whilst I can serve his purpose. Great God, merciful God, let me be calm, for out of this way lies madness indeed. I begin to get new lights on certain things which have puzzled me. Up until now I never knew what Shakespeare meant when he made the Hamlet say, My tablets! Quick, my tablets! 'Tis meet that I put it down. For now, feeling as though my brain went unhinged, or as if the shock had come from which must end its undoing, I turned to my diary for repose. The habit of entering accurately must help to soothe me. The Count's mysterious warning frightened me at the time. It frightens me more, and I shall think of it. For in future he has a fearful hold upon me. I shall fear no doubt to what he may say. When I had written in my diary, and had fortunately replaced the book and pen in my pocket, I felt sleepy. The Count's warning came into my mind, but I took a pleasure in disobeying it. The sense of sleep was upon me, and with obstinacy, which sleep brings as an outrider. The soft moonlight soothed, and the wide expanse without gave a sense of freedom, which refreshed me. I determined not to return tonight to the gloom-haunted rooms, but to sleep here, where of old ladies had sat and sung, and lived sweet lives with their gentle breasts were sad of their menfolk, away in the remorseless wars. I drew a great couch out of this place, near the corner, so that as I lay, I could look at the lovely view to the east and south, and unthinking of and uncaring for the dust composed myself for sleep. I suppose I must have fallen asleep. I hope so, but I fear for all that followed was startlingly real. So real that now sitting here in the broad, full sunlight of the morning, I cannot in the least believe that I was asleep. I was not alone. The room was the same, unchanged in any way since I came into it. I could see along the floor in the brilliant moonlight my own footsteps marked where I had disturbed a long accumulation of dust. In the moonlight opposite me were 3 young women, ladies by their dress and manner. I thought at the time I must be dreaming when I saw them, for though the moonlight was behind them, they threw no shadow through the floor. They came close to me and looked at me for some time, then whispered together. 2 were dark, and had high aquiline noses, like the Count, and great, dark, piercing eyes that seemed to be almost red when contrasted with the pale yellow moonlight. The other was fair as can be, with great wavy masses of golden hair, and eyes like pale sapphires. I seemed somehow to know her face, and to know it in connection with some dreamy fear, but I could not recollect the moment, how or where. All 3 had brilliant white teeth that shone like pearls against the ruby of the voluptuous lips. There was something about them that made me uneasy. Some longing, and at the same time some deadly fear. I felt it in my heart, a wicked burning desire that they would kiss me with those red lips. It was not good to note this down, as someday it should meet Mina's eyes and cause her pain, but it is the truth. They whispered again, and then all 3 laughed, such a silvery musical laugh, but as hard as the sound ever could have come through the soft of human lips, it was intolerable tingling sweetness of water glasses when played by a cunning hand. The fair girl shook her head goatishly, and the other 2 girls urged her on. One said, "Go on. You're first, and we shall follow you. Yours is the right to begin," the other added. "He is young and strong. There are kisses for us all." I lay quiet, looking out under my eyelashes in agony of delightful anticipation. The fair girl advanced and bent over me, and I could feel the moment of her breath upon me. Sweet as it was, in one sense, honey-sweet, and sent the same tingling through the nerves as her voice, with a bitter underlying, a sweet bitter offensiveness, as one smells in blood. I was afraid to raise my eyelids, but I looked out and saw perfectly under the lashes. The girl went on her knees and bent over me, simply gloating. There was a deliberate voluptuousness, which was both thrilling and repulsive. As she arched her neck, she actually licked her lips like an animal, till I could see the moonlight and the moisture shining on the scarlet lips and on the tongue as it lapped, and the white sharp teeth lower and lower went on her head as the lips went below the range of my mouth and chin, and seemed about to fasten my throat. When she paused, I could hear the churning sound of her cheek tongues as it licked her lips, her teeth and lips, and I could feel a hot breath on my neck, and the skin on my throat began to tingle as one's flesh does when the hand that is to tickle approaches nearer. I could feel the soft shivering touch of the lips on the super sensitive skin on my throat, and the hard dents of two sharp teeth just touching the and pausing there. I closed my hands in a languorous ecstasy and waited with beating heart. But at that instant, another sensation swept through me as quick as lightning. I was conscious of the presence of the Count, and of his being as if lapped in a storm of fury. As my eyes opened involuntarily, I saw his strong hand grasp the slender neck of the fair woman with giant's power draw it back. The blue eyes transformed with fury, and the white teeth champing with rage, and the fair cheeks blazing red with passion. But the Count, never did I imagine such wrath and fury even to the demons of the pit. His eyes were positively blazing. The red light in them was lurid, as if the flames of hell fire blazed behind them. His face was deathly pale, and the lines of it were hard like drawn wires. The thick eyebrows that met over the nose seemed like a heaving bar of white-hot metal, with a fierce sweep of his arm. He hurled the woman from him, and then motioned to the others as though he were beating them back. It was the same imperious gesture that I had seen used with the wolves. In a voice which, though was low and almost in a whisper, he seemed to cut through the air and ring around the room. He said, "How dare you touch him, any of you? How dare you cast eyes on him, which I have forbidden? Back, I tell you. This man belongs to me. Beware how you meddle with him, or you'll have to deal with me." The fair girl, with a laugh of ribald coquetry, turned to answer him. "You yourself never loved. You never love." On this, the other women joined in such a mirthless, hard, soulless laughter ranged the room that it almost made me faint to hear that it seemed like the pleasure of fiends. Then the Count turned, after looking at my face attentively, and said in a soft whisper, "Yes, I too can love. You yourselves can tell it from the past. Is it not so? Well, now I promise you that when I am done with him, you shall kiss him at your will. Now go. I must awaken him, for there is work to be done." "Are we to have nothing tonight?" said one of them with a low laugh, as she pointed to the bag which he had thrown upon the floor, and which moved as though there were some living thing within. For answer, he nodded his head. One of the women jumped forward and opened it. If my ears did not deceive me, there was a gasp and a low wail of a half-smothered child. The women closed around, whilst I was aghast with horror. But as I looked, they disappeared, and with them the dreadful bag. There was no door near them, and they could not have passed me without my noticing. They simply seemed to fade into the rays of the moonlight, and pass through the window, for I could not see the dim, shadowy forms for a moment before they entirely faded away. And the horror came, and I sank down unconscious. And how long is this one? ここで終わっていいと思います。I think this is where I'm going to end it for today. Chapter 4. Jonathan Harker's journal continued. That'll be next time. 今日も見てくれてありがとうございます。聞いてくれてありがとうございます。Thank you for watching. Thank you for coming. Gracias por mirar. Espero que venga a verme la próxima vez. So next week we will do chapter 4 of Dracula. I'm not sure how many chapters there are. I'm not good at reading Roman numerals. That's it. Should be 10. It's 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. 27 chapters. And we're over here. I can just click on it. So this was fun. I get to introduce new characters. Like this guy. Yo, credit. 明日はヤクザです。今日は金曜日、明日は土曜日。Tomorrow is Saturday. Am I going to eat? Yep. I don't know what I'm going to eat. 見てくれてありがとうございます。論見てくれてありがとうございます。Thank you for watching and thank you for lurking. And thank you for joining me today. フィードありがとう。Thank you for the feed. あ、違う。では、明日は11時から開始します。I'm going to start tomorrow at 11 a.m. JST. And it's going to be Yakuza. 明日は龍が如く。では、終了。お疲れ。バイバイ。